Blood should mean shelter. But tonight it smells like champagne and poison. If they think I'll drink, they don't know the man who taught half the city how to read a room. My name is Marshall. 63 years of kitchens, ledgers, and dining rooms have tuned my ears to the music of the crowd. The clink of crystal, the false laugh that lands a half-beat late, the shuffle of staff whose eyes won't meet your own. Katie called after years of silence, voice bright and brittle. Dad, a new page. Come to the museum gala. I heard the plea buried inside the promise. I also heard a draft through the phone, something cold. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The museum rose in the night like a ship of marble, all columns and spotlights, a white theater where people performed wealth. Cameras flashed metallic cicadas. A quartet sawed a tasteful storm along the mezzanine. Up the steps, her hand finding my sleeve, my daughter slimmer, harder around the mouth. She smelled like clean paper. "You came," she said, like she'd achieved a miracle. I kissed her temple and felt bone. Then Celeste swept in, Katie's wife, in a dress the color of wet steel. She smiled with all her teeth and none of her eyes. "Marshall," she cooed, pressing a flute into my palm. "Vintage. We saved it for you." The glass chimed with a tray, a bell you'd ring to summon trouble. I turned the stem, watched bubbles rope upward through pale gold. In their tiny ascent, I saw the first restaurant I opened, my mother's recipe cards. Katie at 8, stealing cherries and promising secrets. Later, I said, "I want to see the Greek marbles. You know me. I like old things that survive." Celeste's hand tightened a fraction on my wrist before she let go. "Oh, but a toast," she said, lilting rehearsed. "To new pages." Katie's nails clicked against her flute. Click, click, nervous telegraph. A host ushered us into the great hall. Statues stood along the walls like judges in togas, their blank eyes tilted toward the living. Under their gaze, everything felt colder than the air allowed. People were watching us. Not just the usual curiosity. Something focused, expectant, like the pause before a coin toss. I cataloged details. The donor board had my name too big. The catering captain avoided looking at me after glancing at Celeste. 2 security guards stood closer to the service corridor that made sense for an art crowd. The quartet's cellist kept peeking at a door behind the stage. My life trained me to see it. A restaurant only runs when 100 small lies agree on the same story. Tonight, the story couldn't keep its lies straight. "Dad." Katie's voice flickered. "Will you say a few words?" A spot tracked across the ceiling, found my face, warmth on my skin. The marble behind me drank the light. My hand still held the glass, small, elegant, heavy. I raised it. The hall hushed. I let the silence stretch, enough to make the room exhale twice. The violin hissed its last note. Celeste leaned in the way a fencer leans into a lunge. My phone buzzed in my jacket. I'm a man who doesn't check his phone on a stage. But the sound cut sharp as a knife testing tomato skin. I slipped a thumb beneath the lapel, old habit from 1,000 openings, and glanced down. For words on a clean field. Leave. Now. Don't trust them. I looked up. Katie saw the change in my eyes and blinked. Celeste's smile froze a millimeter too high. Around us, the cameras rose like a thicket of silver insects. The room expected a toast. I set the flute down without drinking, and in the hushed glass sound of crystal touching marble, I felt the night divide. Then the phone chimed again, and a second message arrived, short and surgical. "They prepared the bottle for you." The second message glowed like a knife in my pocket. "They prepared the bottle for you." I didn't move right away. In my line of work, hesitation is survival. Every great chef knows, burn your tongue once, and you learn to test the sauce with the back of the spoon. I let the hall breathe again, gave them what they wanted, the illusion that I was considering words. To survival, I finally murmured, tapping the rim of the glass but never drinking. Laughter scattered politely, but I heard the edge beneath it, a whisper confusion. Katie clapped too quickly, like a conductor forcing a tempo. The statues along the hall seemed to lean closer, silent jurors carved from ice. Celeste brushed her palm along my shoulder, her nails grazing cloth. Perfect Marshall. Now mingle, she whispered, with the urgency of someone rehearsed to the second. Her perfume was sharp, a citrus hiding something sour. I smiled, but I angled my path toward the Greek wing, away from the champagne. Guests drifted like schools of fish, sequins shimmering under chandeliers. Each pair of eyes lingered on me, then slid away with rehearsed grace. My instincts roared. This wasn't hospitality. This was theater. The marble stood in ranks, heroes with missing arms, faces battered by centuries yet still upright. I placed my hand against the cool stone of a soldier's thigh and felt steadier. Here was endurance, not artifice. In the shadow of the statue, I drew out my phone, thumb trembling less than I expected. I dialed an old number, one I never thought I'd need again. "Police dispatch," came the voice. "This is Marshall Doyle. I'm at the museum gala. Possible attempt on my life." My voice was calm, clipped as though ordering oysters. "Send plain clothes, quick." The dispatcher asked for detail. I gave it in clean, unseasoned facts: poisoned champagne, suspicious guards, an anonymous warning. She promised officers were already nearby. Good. Let them come. I ended the call and looked back through the archway. Katie laughed too loud at a donor's joke. Celeste's eyes never left the champagne flute I'd abandoned. Her smile had calcified, waiting for the cue that never came. I thought of Katie at 10, running through our first restaurant, waving menus like flags. "One day I'll be boss, Dad," she'd shouted. I'd laugh then, proud. Tonight, the echo of that memory felt like a blade. I moved deeper into the gallery. The floor was marble, each step ringing like a clock tick. My pulse kept pace, steady but charged. At the far end stood a service corridor door, slightly ajar. Beyond it, voices hurried, muffled. I leaned close. Words drifted out. After the toast, smooth, no trace, then a hush, as if someone had sensed me. I slipped back into the main hall before they emerged. The gala hummed on, but the seams were splitting. The quartet now played too fast, the cellist sweating under lights. A guard's hand rested inside his jacket, like a gambler waiting on a card. Katie finally caught my gaze. She tilted her head, confusion flickering. Was she part of the play, or was she already trapped in Celeste's choreography? My chest tightened with the question. A waiter approached, silver tray glinting. Another glass, twin to the first, hovered before me. He smiled, but his hand shook. I studied the liquid, bubbles rising too evenly as though staged. "No, thank you," I said, soft than steel. And then, across the marble floor, a sound shattered the false harmony. The slam of a door, the thud of boots, police voices echoing, sharp, official. Every head turned. Celeste froze. Katie paled. The first officer stepped into the golden light and announced, "This is a search. No one leaves the building." And in that frozen silence, I realized the gala had become my courtroom, and their trial had just begun. The announcement cracked the gala, like a plate dropped in a quiet kitchen. Gasps fluttered to the hall. The quartet stumbled into silence, and the donors looked at one another as if their tuxedos and gowns could shield them from the word search. Celeste's jaw twitched first, a muscle betraying her before her lips caught up. "Surely there's a mistake," she said, gliding forward with her politician's poise. "This is a fundraiser, not a crime scene." Her voice poured honey, but the officers didn't drink. Katie clutched her flute so tightly the stem might snap. I studied her face the way I once studied menus, for flaws, for mismatched flavors. And there it was, the flicker of panic behind her eyes, as if the curtain had lifted too soon. The lead officer lifted a folded paper. "We've received credible information regarding contraband stored on these premises. Everyone remain calm. Cooperation will expedite matters." Eyes swung toward me, some searching, some accusing. In the center of the hall, I was no longer guest of honor. I was the hinge on which the night would break. I let the stairs rest. Silence is seasoning. Too much burns. The right pinch brings out the truth. "Do your job," I told the officer, low and steady. My voice carried farther than I expected, climbing the marble like smoke. The search began. Officers fanned the corridors, their radios hissing. Guests whispered into hands, into pearls, into cufflinks. Celeste stayed very still, only her fingers tapping against her clutch, like a drummer waiting for a cue. Katie shifted closer to me, her perfume sharp, her whisper sharper. "Dad, what's happening? Why are they here?" I turned my head just enough. "Why don't you tell me?" Her mouth opened, closed. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale as the statues watching us. Minutes dragged like hours, until a shout echoed from below, from the museum's belly. "We've got something." Boots thundered. Radios crackled. The crowd pressed back, silks and jewels retreating from the gravity of real danger. The officers reemerged, carrying evidence that shone under chandeliers. A bottle of deep green glass, gilded with a vintage label. And in their other hands, folders leather-bound, their edges stuffed with papers too new to belong in history. The lead officer raised his voice. "We discovered forged ownership documents, and—" He shook the bottle slightly, its liquid catching the light, a substance prepared to masquerade as rare wine. Murmurs rippled like a storm tide. Some guests stared in fascination, others in fear. And Katie covered her mouth as though she might be sick. Celeste's facade cracked. She lunged forward, tone too sharp, too rehearsed. "That's ridiculous. Anyone could have planted those. This is harassment of donors." The officer ignored her. His gaze fell on me, lingering, weighing. I didn't flinch. Katie tugged my sleeve, nails biting through the fabric. "Dad," she whispered, trembling. "It wasn't supposed to." She cut herself off, eyes darting to Celeste. The confession had begun to slip free, and I knew the hook was set. My daughter's voice brittle, breaking against the roar of the crowd and the icy watch of marble gods. But before she could finish, Celeste stepped between us, her smile now a blade. "Marshall, don't let them spin tales. Raise another glass. Prove your loyalty to family. Show them all this is nonsense." The waiter reappeared at her signal, tray glinting once more. A fresh flute of gold bubbles stood before me like a dare, like a trigger waiting to be pulled. The hall quieted, every eye pinned on me. Katie's hand trembled on my arm. Celeste's gaze dared me to falter, and the statues watched in silence. I looked at the glass. My fingers didn't move, and in that breathless stillness, Katie's voice cracked the marble air. "Dad, don't please." Katie's plea rang louder than the quartet ever had. The word please clattered against the marble and shattered the illusion of glamour more effectively than any police raid. Head swiveled toward her. For the first time all night, the guests weren't watching me. They were watching my daughter unravel. Her hand slipped from my sleeve as it burned. The flute on the tray between us trembled, the waiter frozen mid-offer. I caught his eye. Young man barely out of school, sweat brightening his temple. He wanted to run. So did half the hall. I folded my hand behind my back, the way I used to when reviewing my kitchen's command without a raised voice. "I won't drink," I said, calm but final, "and neither should anyone else." The silence that followed was a thunderclap. Cameras, always present, snapped awake again, bursts of light hammering the moment into permanence. Donors whispered names, accusations, rumors already sprouting like weeds in dark soil. Celeste's mask cracked then. Her lips tightened. Her teeth clenched so hard I could hear enamel grind. "You ungrateful," she started, then stopped, realizing too late that microphones were hungry tonight. The officers seized a pause. "Ma'am, step aside," one commanded. Two moved toward the corridor she had come from earlier. Another officer took the suspicious bottle into evidence, sealing it in a bag that crinkled like fire. Katie's breathing quickened. She gripped the edge of a chair, knuckles white. Her voice barely found shape. It was the debts, Dad. The loans, 300,000, maybe more. Words spilled like coins tumbling from a split purse. Celeste said there was no other way. Gasps rolled through the hall. Some guests recoiled, scandal clinging like smoke. Others leaned forward, feasting on drama richer than any dessert. Celeste spun on her, eyes sharp as daggers. "Shut your mouth." Her tone could have cut marble. But the damage was done. Katie's confession hung in the air, impossible to take back. I looked at my daughter. Her mascara had smudged, her shoulders sagged. But somewhere beneath the collapse was still a child who once carried menus through my dining room like medals. I felt both pity and fury. Pity for her weakness. Fury for the knife she'd pressed against her own blood. The officers approached them now, notebooks open, questions ready. The crowd pressed back to give space, but no one left. The spectacle bound them like a spell. I could feel the weight of lenses, the hunger for a headline. Heiress betrays father at gala. I raised my chin. You try to bury me under marble and wine. I said, voice low, but amplified by silence. But tonight, it's the truth that's being poured. A ripple of murmurs followed, half admiration, half dread. Katie's sob cracked the air. Celeste's glare promised vengeance. And then, through the maze of officers and donors, a figure emerged quietly, almost invisible. A woman in the muted uniform of the museum staff, keys clinking softly at her hip. She didn't draw attention, but her eyes found mine, steady, unafraid. I knew, with the certainty a chef knows his knife, that this was a hand behind the anonymous warning. The silent guardian who'd chosen to risk everything. Nora. But before I could step toward her, another shout erupted from the cellar. We've found a safe. The word echoed, heavy, final, as if the statues themselves had spoken judgment. And I realized the night's true secret hadn't even surfaced yet. The word safe rolled to the marble hall like thunder trapped underground. Conversations died mid-breath. Even the quartet, still clutching their instruments like shields, froze as if the music itself had been locked away. The officers moved with sharpened purpose now, guiding the crowd back while a pair descended once more into the museum's underbelly. Celeste's face drained of color, then refilled with rage. She hissed at Katie through her teeth. You idiot! Couldn't keep quiet for 10 minutes. Katie's sobs sputtered, her hands trembling like leaves in wind. I didn't know they'd... She cut herself off, staring at me with wet, red-rimmed eyes. Dad, I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't answer. Words would have been wasted. My silence weighed more than any lecture ever could. Guests craned their necks toward the stairwell, hungry for spectacle. Phones gleamed, recording what would be tomorrow's scandal across every feed and headline. The irony wasn't lost on me. All their planned publicity had turned to evidence against them. Boots clanged on marble as officers returned, carrying a metal box heavy enough to make veins stand in their forearms. They set it on a linen-covered banquet table, silverware rattling with the impact. A lockpick clinked. The safe yawned open with a screech, coughing secrets into the light. Inside, paper stamped with false seals, contracts dripping with forgery, and nestled beside them, vials and bottles, their glass throats corked tight, liquid shimmering unnatural under chandeliers. The officer held one aloft, label in ornate script. Rare Burgundy, 1897. He twisted the cap. The stench that leaked out was bitter, chemical, unmistakable. Poison. A wave of disgust swept the hall. Someone gagged. Another whispered, monsters. The marble statue seemed to lean closer. Silent jurors witnessing damnation. Celeste's composure cracked fully. She lunged toward the safe, shrieking, Those aren't ours. This is a setup. 2 officers caught her, arms twisted, dignity snapping with each futile thrash. Cameras devoured her humiliation, bulbs strobing her downfall. The first public fracture. Katie collapsed into a chair, covering her face. It was supposed to be just papers, she whispered, voice muffled, broken. Not this. Never this. I stood, rooted, watching the unraveling of blood and betrayal. My heart didn't race. It slowed, like a metronome steadying a symphony. For 63 years I'd built a life out of discipline, of timing, of knowing when to salt and when to sear. Tonight, all that practice simmered to this moment, letting truth do the cooking. Celeste spat words over her shoulder as officers restrained her. He deserves nothing. Old man clinging to scraps while the world passes him by. This empire should have been ours. Her venom echoed, but it no longer struck. The room's judgment had shifted. the tide pulling away from her shore. Then, from the back of the hall, the quiet voice I'd noticed earlier rose. I saw her with the safe. Nora, small, steady, a museum worker easily overlooked, stepped forward. I heard them in the cellar. They thought no one was listening. Every head turned. A staff badge glinted on her chest, her uniform plain, her courage luminous. She met the officer's gaze, then mine, unwavering. Katie lifted her head just long enough to see who had betrayed their plot. Recognition flared. Her? That nobody. Her voice cracked on the word, half disbelief, half fury. But the crowd had already made up its mind. They weren't listening to Katie anymore. They were listening to Nora. The officer sealed the poison back into evidence bags. "This is attempted murder," he said flatly. Gasps burst, but I stayed silent, letting the word hang. Attempted murder. The hall was no longer a gala. It was a courtroom, a crucible, and a battlefield of family. And I knew the next move was mine. The evidence bag swung in the officer's hands like grim pendulums, each sway marking the collapse of the evening's masquerade. Celeste fought against their grip, her polished exterior peeling away with every desperate thrash. Katie sat hollow in her chair, mascara bleeding into rivers, eyes darting like a trapped animal searching for an exit. I stood in the center of the marble hall, no longer guest but witness, judge, and if fate allowed, executioner justice. Around us, donors whisper with the hunger of vultures circling a fresh kill. Phones hovered higher, eager to immortalize the wreck. This was no longer their glittering fundraiser. It was my reckoning, played under chandeliers and watched by gods of stone. The lead officer gestured to me. "Sir, you'll need to provide a statement." His tone carried respect, but also recognition. The gravity of betrayal ran deeper than any crime report. I inclined my head. "In time," I said. My voice carried calm, but my chest burned. 63 years had taught me restraint. Tonight restraint was my blade. Katie rose unsteadily, clutching the chair for balance. Her voice cracked, too fragile to carry the weight of the hall. "Dad, I didn't want you dead. I swear it. The debts, the casinos. Celeste said it was the only way." She reached for me, trembling fingers trembling like a child's again. The crowd gasped. There was the second humiliation, the public confession. Cameras hissed in a storm of flashes. The heiress admitting weakness, exposing ruin. My daughter laid bare. Celeste shrieked, lunging against her restraints. "Shut up. Do you want to damn us both?" Her fury sprayed across marble, across cameras, across history. Officers pressed her down, each flail making her look less like a queen and more like an animal cornered. I didn't flinch. Instead, I let the silence grow teeth. Then I stepped toward Katie. $300,000, I repeated, each word carved from granite. "And you chose blood over honesty." Her knees buckled. "I was scared," she whispered. "I thought you'd never forgive me." Forgiveness. The word hung in the air, heavy as the safe that had betrayed them. I studied her face, the echo of the girl who once carried menus, who once believed family meant sanctuary. Now, that echo sounded hollow, corrupted by greed and fear. Nora, still near the crowd's edge, shifted nervously. She hadn't sought spotlight, but the truth had dragged her into its glare. I met her gaze. She didn't look away. In her eyes I saw something Katie had lost, loyalty unbought, unbroken. The lead officer cleared his throat, uneasy with the silence. "Sir, the situation is under control. You're safe now." Safe. The word tasted bitter. Nothing about this night was safe. Not the marble halls, not the family ties, not the champagne still glittering in crystal flutes. I turned to the assembled guests, my voice carrying across the vaulted dome. "Look well. This is what greed makes a family. Statues and lies. Cold hands clutching an inheritance while warmth dies." Gasps rippled. Some nodded, some averted their eyes, but none could ignore me. I had seized the stage they'd built for betrayal and made it my pulpit. Then, from the cellar once more, another officer's shout rose. "We've got ledgers, names, accounts, offshore transfers." The hall erupted into chaos. Donors whispered with sudden fear. Were their names inside? Had they been complicit, even unknowingly? The glittering elite of the city suddenly saw their reflections in that safe, and none of them liked the image. Katie collapsed back into the chair, face buried in her hands. Celeste spat curses in every direction, her dignity stripped. Nora stood firm, silent but radiant in her courage. And me? I looked at the poison bottle sealed in plastic. My reflection stared back, warped by glass. This was no longer about debts. This was war. And the next battle will be fought in the open, with every eye watching. The museum no longer smelled of champagne and roses. It reeked of fear. The ledgers pulled from the safe spread across a banquet table, pages fluttering in the draft of ceiling fans, each line of ink a dagger pointed at reputations. Donors leaned in, trying a glimpse, then shrank back, terrified their names might bleed from those pages next. Celeste fought her restraints like a mad conductor trying to summon an orchestra from chaos. Lies. Forgeries, she howled. You'll all regret believing this farce. Her voice cracked into shrillness, carrying not authority but desperation. Every scream carved her further down from elegance to disgrace. The second public humiliation, etched in every guest phone. Katie sat like a broken marionette. Strings cut. She whispered to no one. We just needed a way out. I thought it was papers, just papers. Her words dissolved under the weight of marble silence. I stood at the heart of it, the axis around which the chaos spun. My anger was quiet now, distilled into something sharper. 63 years had taught me that rage spent too fast is wasted. I would pour mine slowly, until it burned through everything false. The lead officer approached, lowering his voice. Mr. Doyle, you should step outside. We can escort you safely. I shook my head. No, my place is here. Let them hear the truth with their own ears. He hesitated but didn't argue. Authority had already shifted. It belonged to me now. I walked toward the safe. Papers spilled, contracts with counterfeit seals, evidence of schemes thicker than smoke. I lifted one page, name scrawled in Celeste's hand. Offshore accounts, debts hidden, betrayals inked into permanence. I held it up. This isn't just about money. This is about trust strangled for profit. Look around you. How many of you thought family was untouchable? My voice echoed across the dome. Blood doesn't shield you when greed carves the knife. The hall fell silent. Even the statues seemed to lean in listening. Celeste snarled, spittle bright under chandeliers. You're nothing but an old relic, Marshall. Your empire rots with you. Katie and I were saving it from your weakness. I turned to her, calm as winter stone. If poison in a wine bottle is your idea of salvation, then I'd rather see it all burn. Gasps rippled through the room. Some guests even clapped, hesitant but real, the way a crowd honors a truth too dangerous to ignore. Katie lifted her head, tears cutting black streaks down her cheeks. Dad, she whispered, voice breaking. I never wanted this. I just wanted... She swallowed the words, unable to finish. I didn't comfort her. Mercy comes later, after reckoning. And then, amid the tension, I caught movement at the edge of the crowd. Nora, the quiet custodian, stepped forward again. Her uniform was plain, but her voice cut through the hall. I warned him because loyalty isn't bought. He deserved to know the danger. Not because he's rich, not because of his name, but because no one should die for another's greed. A hush fell deeper than before. The crowd shifted, perspective tilting. Here stood a stranger, with nothing to gain, risking everything. Her truth outshone the chandelier glare. I met her gaze and nodded once. Gratitude, respect, recognition. Celeste screamed, lunging toward her, but the officers pinned her harder, dragging her arms behind her back. Cameras flashed mercilessly. That was her third humiliation. Her fall, her undoing, immortalized for every scream by dawn. But amid the humiliation and revelations, I felt a shadow stretch longer. This night wasn't done with me. Because if debts had driven my daughter to betray me once, I knew, somewhere beyond these marble walls, those creditors were still waiting, and they would not forgive a failed performance. The gala had dissolved into something raw, jagged, and unforgettable. Donors clutched their pearls, their programs, their phones. Anything to steady themselves against the tide of revelation. The police held Celeste like a captured predator, her fury echoing off the marble. Katie slumped in disgrace, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. And Nora, quiet Nora, stood straighter than all of them, her words still hanging like a banner in the vaulted air. I could have walked away then, claimed safety, slipped into night with my name cleared. But I knew better. Debts that size, 300,000, don't simply vanish. They ripple outward like stones dropped in a pond, and every ripple carries knives. The lead officer pulled me aside. "Mr. Doyle will handle the charges from here. You should leave before the press crowds in." I studied his young face, earnest but naive. "No," I said evenly. "If I walk out now, the story belongs to them. Tonight, it belongs to me." I turned back to crowd. Guests shifted, uneasy, but they didn't leave. Scandal is a drug too potent to resist. "Look at what greed does," I said, my voice carrying steady under the dome. "It turns family into predators and celebration into a trap. You came here expecting a fundraiser. What you got was the truth. Wealth without honor is nothing but poison in a glass." A murmur of agreement stirred. Someone even clapped, though it died quickly, embarrassed. Katie lifted her head, tears catching the light. "Dad, I'm sorry," she whispered hoarsely. "I just wanted relief. I thought we could fix it later." Relief. Fix it later. Words gamblers use as prayers. I looked at her, and for the first time that night, I felt something colder than betrayal. Pity. She wasn't a villain. She was a drowning soul who dragged me under in her panic. Celeste had steered the storm. Her glare burned holes in me as officers kept her restrained. "You think you've won, Marshal? The debts don't vanish. They'll come for you next. For her." She jerked her head toward Nora, spitting venom. "You made her visible. Now she's a target, too." Nora stiffened, but she didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed on me, steady, waiting. The officer barked, "Enough!" dragging Celeste back. But her words had already poisoned the air. The creditors weren't faceless now. They were shadows pressing against the edges of my future. Katie sobbed into her palms. "They'll kill me if I can't pay them." And there it was, the hidden weight, the chain still shackled to my blood. If I let her fall completely, those shadows might still claw toward me, toward everything I'd built. But if I forgave her too easily, the lesson would rot before it set. I breathed deep, the hall's air thick with perfume, sweat, and scandal. I saw the marble statues again, cold, unblinking, eternal. Families carved in stone, arms broken, faces missing, but still standing centuries later. Survival, not beauty, was their legacy. I turned to the officers. "Take them. Charge them. Let the law do what it must." Flashes erupted again as Celeste was dragged screaming to the double doors, her last curses bouncing off the marble until they faded. Katie didn't resist, only sagged as cuffs closed around her wrists. The third humiliation was complete. No cameras could ever erase it now. The hall, once a theater of opulence, was left hollow. Guests whispered excuses and fled into the night, desperate to distance themselves from scandal. Only the statues remained, and Nora, standing in the quiet aftermath with her keys glinting at her hip. I exhaled slowly. The trap had failed. The poison had stayed corked. But Celeste's parting words echoed in my skull. The real danger hadn't ended here. It had only been invited closer. The museum emptied like a banquet after spoiled meat. Quick steps, hushed whispers, eyes averted from the rot they'd just feasted on. Only officers remained, packing evidence into boxes, sealing ledgers into bags. The air smelled of latex gloves, sweat, and a faint sour tang where the uncorked poison had touched open air. I stood beneath the marble gods, alone except for Nora. She lingered a few paces back, as though afraid proximity might tether her fate to mine. Yet her eyes stayed fixed on me, steady, unshaken. "You should go home," I said finally, my voice graveled by fatigue. She shook her head. "No, you don't see it yet. Tonight wasn't an ending. It was a flare. You embarrassed them. People with debts that size, they don't vanish. They retaliate. Her words echo the poison Celeste spat before being dragged away. A truth, not a threat. I almost smiled. You got sharper instincts than half the chefs I fired, and more loyalty than most blood I've known. She flushed but didn't lower her gaze. You need allies. Even old empires crumble faster when they're standing alone. I thought of my restaurants. 8 kitchens across the city. Dozens of staff who still called me chef even when I hadn't touched a skillet in years. They were my legacy, my cathedral of flavor and memory. And now, thanks to Katie's debts, they were exposed. The creditors wouldn't just come for her. They'd come for the Doyle name itself. One officer approached, clipboard in hand. Mr. Doyle, we'll need you at headquarters tomorrow for your full statement. Tonight, it might be wise to lay low. His tone softened, almost paternal. You've stirred a hornet's nest. I signed his forms without reading. My focus was elsewhere, already planning, already strategizing. 63 years teaches you. When the fire's too hot, you don't panic. You move the pan. When the last officers left, the hall plunged into a heavy silence. The chandeliers hummed faintly, their bulbs cooling like dying stars. I looked around at the abandoned glasses, the silk napkins, the toppled flute I'd refused to drink from, a battlefield disguised as a party. Nora broke the silence. Why did you come tonight, really? After years of silence. I exhaled, because a daughter called, and I was fool enough to believe family meant forgiveness. My voice cracked on the last word. I straightened before it could deepen into weakness. But family without loyalty is just strangers with shared blood. She studied me, something unreadable in her gaze. Then she stepped closer. Then maybe it's time you build a new family. The kind that chooses you. The idea lodged in my chest like a seed. Dangerous. Hopeful. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached for the safe, still scarred from where the officers had pried it open. I touched its cold metal lip. Every lie they forged sat in here. They thought steel could hide it, but nothing stays locked forever. The irony struck deep. Celeste and Katie had tried to cage my fate. Instead, the cage had exposed theirs. I turned to Nora, decision forming like a recipe assembling itself in my mind. You saved my life. That kind of loyalty deserves a place to stand. Tomorrow, you'll come to my office. We'll talk about the restaurants. Her eyes widened, disbelief flickering, then resolve. She nodded once. Outside, sirens faded into distance. The museum groaned as though relieved of its burden. I took one last look at the marble statues, their cold eyes witnessing centuries of betrayal and endurance. You lasted. I muttered to them. So will I. But as we stepped into the night air, a chill ran sharper than the autumn wind. Because somewhere out there, in shadows deeper than marble halls, men with ledgers and guns were already rewriting their plans, with my name at the top of the list. The night air outside the museum cut sharper than any kitchen knife I'd ever honed. Reporters swarmed like gulls on a pier, shouting my name, cameras exploding in bursts that turned the steps into daylight. Officers kept them at bay, but microphones still stabbed forward, greedy for blood. Mr. Doyle, did your daughter try to poison you? Will you press charges? Are the restaurants in danger? Every question was a stone. I kept my jaw locked, eyes forward. Silence was the only weapon left in this moment. Anything I said would be carved into headlines by morning. Nora stayed just behind me, small in her uniform but unflinching. Reporters barely glanced at her, not knowing she was the one who had altered the course of the evening. That anonymity was her armor, and I meant to keep it intact, for now. The police ushered us into a waiting car. As the door closed, the cacophony dimmed to a muffled roar. The city light stretched outside the tinted window like smeared brushstrokes, familiar yet distant. For the first time in decades, I felt like a passenger in my own life. Nora broke the silence. They'll come for you now, not just the press. The ones Katie owes. You know that, right? I nodded. Debts don't die. They collect interest. And predators don't forgive failed hunts. She studied me, then asked softly, So what will you do? I turned my head, meeting her gaze in the reflection of the glass. What I've always done. Survive, adapt, and when necessary, strike first. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. Respect, not fear. The driver wound through downtown until we reached one of my smaller restaurants. Closed at this hour, but still glowing faintly with its neon sign. Home Kitchen, it read. I'd chosen the name decades ago, when I believed home meant family. Tonight the word tasted different, bittersweet. Inside, the staff had left the place tidy. Chairs up, tables wiped, the faint aroma of garlic still lingering in the air. I breathed it in. Kitchens don't lie. They either nourish or they burn. I sat at a corner booth, the same spot I'd once used for meetings with suppliers. Nora slid into the opposite seat, her keys jingling softly as she settled. You said something in there. I began about building a new family, one that chooses you. She nodded cautiously. I'm offering you more than thanks. I continued. You've got loyalty. You've got instinct. I need both. You'll manage the restaurants with me. Front line, decisions, trust. You in? Her eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate long. I'm in. For the first time that night, I let a thin smile escape. Good. Then you'll learn quickly that survival isn't about cooking meals. It's about managing wolves. As if summoned, my phone buzzed on the table. A new message. Unknown number. I opened it. You embarrassed us tonight. The debt is still owed. Pay or bleed. Nora leaned forward. Them? I slid the phone toward her so she could see. My reflection glared back from the dark screen. Yes, I said, my voice a low growl. And they've just made the mistake of thinking I'm still on the menu. I closed the phone, the weight of decision settling like cast iron in my chest. Tonight had been about survival. Tomorrow would be about offense. Because if the creditors wanted blood, they were about to learn I wasn't serving dinner anymore. I was serving revenge. The text message burned in my pocket long after I closed the phone. Pay or bleed. 3 words as crude as the men behind them. Creditors don't write poetry. They write ultimatums. And they don't bluff. Nora sat across from me in the dim light of the closed restaurant, her hands folded on the table but her eyes restless. She was brave, yes, but she was still new to the weight of enemies you couldn't see. They'll come fast, she said finally. Tonight you humiliated them. That doesn't just vanish. They'll want to make an example. I leaned back, the leather booth creaking under my shoulders. Let them come. The worst mistake a predator can make is believing age makes you weak. Her brow furrowed. So what's the plan? I tapped the phone once, a finger drumbeat. We start by gathering information. A chef doesn't cook blind. You taste, you test, you plan. Outside, a siren moaned low in the distance, fading into city night. The neon sign flickered in the window. Home Kitchen. The red glow bleeding across the empty tables like a warning. I thought of Katie, my daughter, shackled by her own debts, dragged into the police van. Was she sobbing still, or already negotiating, whispering names to anyone who'd listen? Blood ties had snapped, but her choices still chain me. Nora broke my spiral. If they know you're not paying, they'll come for the restaurants first. Smash the windows. Threaten the staff. Fear spreads faster than truth. I nodded slowly. Then tomorrow we meet the staff before anyone else can. We tell them the truth. No poison, no rumors. Just the facts. And we show them leadership that doesn't crack under pressure. Her lips curved slightly. Public humiliation cuts both ways. You already destroyed Celeste in front of half the city. Do the same to her creditors, and they'll scatter. Smart woman. She understood the battlefield had shifted. It wasn't marble halls anymore. It would be kitchens, dining rooms, cameras, and ledgers. The phone buzzed again. Another message, same number, 1 week. Then we collect. I let the words settle. 1 week was both a threat and a gift. Time to maneuver, to prepare. Time to turn the hunters into prey. I looked across the table at Nora. They think they gave me a deadline. What they really gave me is a stage. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look away. Then we better make a performance no one forgets. For the first time since the gala, I laughed. Low, rough, but real. You've got the soul of a strategist. Maybe you were never meant to dust statues. Maybe you were meant to command armies. She smiled faintly. I just know loyalty when I see it, and I've chosen mine. Those words struck deeper than I expected. Chosen, after a lifetime of betrayal hidden under the mask of family. That single word felt like oxygen. I rose from the booth, sliding the phone into my pocket. Then the first act begins tomorrow. Staff meeting at dawn. After that, we take the fight public. Nora stood with me, and tonight, I pulled the restaurant keys from my pocket, dropped them into her palm. Tonight, lock this place. Tomorrow, you unlock it as manager. Consider it official. Her fingers curled around the keys, her eyes shining with something between shock and determination. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. The empty kitchen beyond smelled faintly of garlic and steel. Memories of decades, of laughter, of betrayal. Family tried to bury me. I murmured, now strangers will help me rise. And as I stepped in the cold night, I knew. The week ahead would decide everything. But it wouldn't be me bleeding when the final plate was served. Dawn broke over the city like a knife through parchment. Clean, sharp, unforgiving. By the time the first staff trickled into home kitchen, I was already seated at the long communal table, coffee steaming before me. Paper spread like blueprints of war. Nora stood at my side, no longer background shadow, but steady presence. Her new keys jingled at her hip like medals. The staff whispered when they saw her there. They'd heard pieces of scandal already. Rumors travel faster than fire through grease. Some eyes darted with fear. Would their pay vanish with the Doyle name? Others looked at me with cautious trust. I had been their anchor for decades. If I wavered now, the whole fleet would sink. I raised a hand. Silence settled. You've all seen the news. I began. You've heard the rumors. My daughter and her wife tried to poison me. They failed. What matters now is this. The restaurants stand, and so do I. You'll be paid. You'll be safe. Relief rippled, but was thin, fragile. They needed more than promises. They needed a performance. I gestured to Nora. This is Nora. She saved my life last night. She's a new manager. From today forward, loyalty is our first ingredient. Some gasped softly, shocked that an outsider, a museum custodian, would step into leadership, but her quiet strength calmed them. She nodded, speaking simple words. I'm here because I chose to be, and I'll fight for this place as if it were my own. It landed. The tension eased, the staff exchanging glances that said maybe, just maybe, this ship could stay afloat. Then I dropped the stone in the water. I held up my phone, showing them the message. 1 week. Then we collect. Gasps, curses, mutters. One cook slammed his palm against the table. Chef, they'll come for us. Smash the windows. Scare off customers. Let them try. I cut in, voice low but cutting. We'll meet them head on. We'll use their threats to feed the city something better. Truth. The world already knows what they tried to do at the gala. Now we'll show them strength. We'll host the biggest dinner this city has ever seen. Press, donors, customers, all under our roof. And when those men come sniffing for blood, they'll find cameras instead. The staff looked stunned. Nora's eyes lit with understanding. Public humiliation again, she murmured. Turn their shadow into a spotlight. I nodded. Exactly. They think intimidation wins. We'll show them exposure destroys. The room grew electric. Fear hadn't vanished, but it had transformed into resolve, into something almost like excitement. They weren't just cooks and servers anymore. They were soldiers, ready to serve truth as the main course. I leaned forward, both palms on the table. Family betrayed me. Strangers saved me. Now together we defend what's ours, and we do it loudly. A cheer rose, not loud, not yet, but strong enough to steady the walls. As the meeting ended, Nora pulled me aside. You're making yourself bait. I smiled grimly. Good bait catches the hungriest fish. She looked at me, searching my face for hesitation. then nodded. Then I'll stand beside you, even if the hook bites deep. The coffee had gone cold, but my blood felt hot, alive. The stage was set, and I knew. When the creditors came through my doors, the feast they expected would become their funeral. Preparations turned the week into a forge. Every day the staff moved like soldiers drilling, polishing tables until they gleamed like shields, rehearsing service as if each plate carried more than food, like each plate carried our survival. Nora directed with quiet precision, her voice steady where nerves trembled. She wore her new keys proudly, not as tools but as armor. News outlets circled like hawks. The scandal had already made headlines. Heiress and wife arrested for attempted poisoning. Now the press wanted follow-up. How would the Doyle empire respond? I gave them nothing but a date. Friday, dinner for the city. That was enough to bait the trap. By Thursday, the threats thickened. Another message blinked on my phone. Cancel. Or burn. This one came with a photo. My front restaurant window shattered. Bricks on the floor like broken teeth. Staff were shaken, but I stood in the glass shards myself, sweeping alongside them. They want fear, I said. We'll give them hospitality instead. Stronger than fear. Stronger than glass. The staff saw me work, shoulders bent, hands scarred but steady. They drew courage from it. By nightfall, their laughter returned in pockets. The kitchen singing again with knives on boards and pans hissing like applause. Friday arrived. Cameras crowded the sidewalk, lights stabbing through dusk. Inside, the restaurant glowed warm, candles, polished silver, the smell of rosemary and seared meat curling into the air. Every table filled with donors, journalists, strangers hungry not just for food, but for story. I stood in the kitchen doorway, coat pressed, hair silver under the lights. Nora at my side, clipboard steady in her hands. She whispered, "They'll come tonight. I can feel it." "I hope they do," I murmured back. "The stage is ready." Service began. Plates slid out flawless. Lamb with minted glaze, pasta like silk, desserts crowned in gold leaf. Guests murmured praise. Reporters scribbled. Cameras clicked. The hum of satisfaction filled the room. And then, as expected, the shadow arrived. Two men pushed the front door without reservation, black coats heavy, faces sharp with debt collector cruelty. They didn't ask for a table. They stood in the center of the dining room, eyes sweeping the crowd, daring interruption. One held a slip of paper high. Katie's IOU, my name scrawled as collateral. Murmurs rippled. Cameras swung their way. Hungry. I stepped from the kitchen, voice carrying over clinks and whispers. "Gentlemen, you're late for your reservation." Laughter burst from the diners. Uneasy at first, then rolling as cameras captured every second. Public humiliation. Sharp and clean. The first cut. The men froze, caught between violence and the glare of dozens of lenses. The taller one sneered, forcing a smile. "We're here for what's owed. 1 week. Tonight's the deadline." He slapped the IOU onto a white-clothed table, the sound sharp as a gunshot. I picked up the paper, held it to the candle flame until the edges curled, blackened, turned to ash before their eyes. "Debt paid," I said. Gasps, flashes, murmurs exploding into applause. The collectors stood paralyzed, stripped not by law but by spectacle. Nora leaned close, her whisper fierce. "That was only the opening move. They won't stop here." I kept my eyes on the men as security edged closer. My smile was steady, but inside the fire spread. Because she was right. Tonight was humiliation. But revenge still had courses left to serve. The ash from the burned IOU still curled in the candle dish, smoke threading into the chandelier light. The collectors glared at me, trapped in a spotlight they hadn't expected. Cameras devoured every flicker of their rage, every bead of sweat rolling down their temples. One tried to salvage dignity. "You think this is over, old man? Paper burns, but numbers don't." I stepped closer, slow, deliberate. The room hushed, forks paused midair, waiters frozen like statues. "Numbers don't scare me," I said, my voice low but carrying. "I built an empire on them. Cost, margin, recipe, ledger. You want to threaten me with math? Try honor instead. Try loyalty. You'll find me bankrupt of neither. Applause rippled through the diners. A donor raised his glass. To Doyle. The toast spread, clinking crystal echoing like bells. The collectors shrank under the sound, dwarfed by the crowd they'd meant to intimidate. Public humiliation, sharper than any blade. Security escorted them out, their scowls immortalized in 100 flashing bulbs. One turned at the door, spitting, "This isn't finished." "Good," I answered. "I don't like half-cooked meals." Laughter rolled through the hall, and the night returned to its rhythm. Plates flowed, wine poured, voices rose in celebration. Yet beneath the applause I heard it, the crackle of a storm still building. Later, when the last guest departed, the restaurant stood quiet again, chairs tucked, candles sputtering low. Nora leaned against the table, her clipboard resting forgotten. You humiliated them, but humiliation only breeds anger. I sat heavily in a chair, rubbing my temples. Anger I can handle. What I can't handle is silence. And that's what comes next, vengeance in shadows. She folded her arms. Then we keep the lights on. We stay public. If they strike where everyone can see. I studied her, the steel in her words surprising even me. She had stepped out of the museum's shadows and grown sharper in each fire. You sound more Doyle than blood ever did. I told her. Her cheeks flushed, but her eyes held mine steady. Blood betrayed you. Choice won't. The words lodged deep, anchoring something I hadn't realized was drifting loose. The phone buzzed again, late, insistent. Another message, same faceless number. Fire next time. You'll watch it all burn. Nora read over my shoulder, jaw tightening. They'll target the restaurants. Maybe all of them. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, at the faint smoke stains from 100 past dinners. Then let them light the match. I'll be ready with water or gasoline. The silence between us thickened, heavy with possibility. Outside, rain began tapping the windows, steady, relentless. The city itself seemed to sense the clash coming, like cutlery laid out before the feast. I rose, pulling my coat from the chair. Tomorrow we take precautions. Staff rotations, fire protocols, security at every door. They want me cornered. Fine. I'll build the corner myself. Nora picked up her keys, determination hard in her face. And if they come for you directly? I paused at the door, hand on the frame. Then they'll learn what my daughter and her wife already know. I turned back, eyes cold, voice like steel dragged across stone. That I don't survive out of luck. I survive because I strike last and hardest. The rain outside quickened, drumming a war song against the glass. The stage for the final act was nearly set. The rain didn't stop through the night. It hammered the windows of my apartment like impatient fists, as though the storm itself wanted inside. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Katie once did homework while I balanced restaurant ledgers. The ghosts of those nights pressed against me, but I refused to bend under their weight. By morning, word of the gala's poison and the collector's humiliation had spread across every paper, every feed. Marshall Doyle survives family betrayal. Empire at stake. The headlines painted me as both victim and legend, but I knew better. Legends don't survive unless they fight for the final act. At noon, the first strike came. Fire alarms screamed at one of the downtown restaurants. My phone lit up, staff reporting smoke, flames licking the back alley door. But the protocol's Nora, and I set the night before held. Sprinklers engaged, exits cleared, and within minutes the fire was doused. Minimal damage. No casualties. I drove there myself, rain still slicking the streets. The sight stopped me cold. Black scorch marks clawed up the brick, acrid smoke curling skyward. My staff stood in the rain, coughing but alive. And at their center, steady as a metronome, was Nora. She barked orders with calm authority. Her uniform damp but her eyes burning. "They tried to torch us," she said flatly when I reached her. "But we were ready." I put a hand on her shoulder, gripping firm. "They underestimated us again." The staff gathered, eyes on me. Some were shaking, others furious. "Chef," one of the cooks said, voice hoarse, "how long do we keep fighting?" "They'll just keep coming." I raise my voice over the hiss of rain. As long as it takes. They want fear, we give them fire breaks. They want silence, we answer with truth. And if they want war, then war is what they'll taste. Applause broke out, not polite, but raw, defiant. The fire had singed our walls, but it had tempered our spirit. That night, I convened my managers in the main restaurant, home kitchen. The rain had finally eased, leaving streets glistening like obsidian. I laid the phone on the table, the latest message glowing. Final warning. Surrender everything, or burn with it. I looked at each of them, then at Nora. They want surrender. Tomorrow, we give them spectacle instead. She leaned forward, eyes locked on mine. You mean? Yes. A final dinner. Bigger than the gala. Cameras, city officials, press. Let them come into the light, expecting to break me. And there, in front of everyone, I'll end this. The room went still. One manager whispered, "Chef, that's dangerous. If they show up armed. Then let them." I cut in. This city will see them for what they are. Predators cowering in shadows, dragged into the sun. Nora's hand tightened on her keys, knuckles white. "You'll be bait again." I met her gaze. "No, this time I'll be the trap." The managers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one argued. The decision was set, carved in iron. Tomorrow, the last supper this war would be served. As the meeting ended, I lingered alone in the darkened dining hall. The chandeliers reflected in the windows, twin stars over empty tables. I pulled a photograph from my wallet. Katie at 8 years old, smiling with 2 missing teeth, flour on her cheeks from stealing dough. My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. Tomorrow, I would finish the story. Tomorrow, I would close the book on blood ties, on betrayal, on debts written in poison and flame. And when the last candle guttered out, the city would know. Marshall Doyle does not forgive. He delivers. Blood doesn't always mean family. Tonight, the city will see that written in fire. Those words whispered through my mind as the doors to home kitchen swung open for the last supper. The chandeliers burned brighter than they ever had. Every table dressed in white, every candle tall and unyielding. The smell of seared lamb and rosemary filled the air, an aroma of comfort masking the tension sharp as glass. The press packed the room, cameras perched like vultures. City officials, donors, curious strangers, they all came for spectacle. They came to watch if the old man would finally break. I stood in the kitchen doorway, coat pressed, posture steady. My scars, my silver hair, my voice, everything about me spoke not of weakness, but of survival. Nora stood beside me, clipboard in hand, her eyes locked forward like a soldier ready for battle. The night began smooth. Plates left the kitchen flawless. Staff moving with military precision. Diners murmur praise. Reporters scribble headlines. Then, at the height of service, the doors crashed open. They arrived. The collectors, flanked by shadows and black coats, stormed into the hall with the confidence of wolves. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze, and cameras pivoted instantly toward them. The tallest held up a pistol, gleaming under the chandelier light. Gasps spread like wildfire. "Enough games," he snarled. "Doyle, tonight you pay." The room teetered between terror and spectacle. But I stepped forward, voice steady, carrying like a blade. "Put that down. This isn't your hunting ground. It's my table." Flashes burst, immortalizing the moment. The city watched, live-streamed, recorded forever. The collectors wanted shadows. I dragged them into the sun. Nora moved to block a group of staff, shielding them without hesitation. Her courage lit the room brighter than the chandeliers. "You won't touch him," she said, her voice quiet but cutting. The leader sneered, aiming at me. But before he could act, sirens wailed outside. Doors burst open again. Police swarmed, weapons raised, voices thunderous. The trap was sprung. I had called them hours earlier, given them the time and place. The hall erupted. Collectors shouted, diners screamed, but cameras never stopped rolling. Officers disarmed the gunmen, forced them to their knees. The leader's pistol clattered to marble, skittering across the floor like a failed bet. And then I delivered the final cut. I raised a glass, champagne but untouched. I held it high for every lens, every guest, every judge of the night. This was meant to kill me, I said, voice echoing. Instead, it exposed them. Betrayal in family, greed in debt, predators hiding behind threats. Tonight, the poison is theirs to swallow. The room erupted in applause, furious, cathartic, unstoppable. The collectors, once shadows, now knelt humiliated under spotlights and flashing bulbs. Public execution by truth. When it was done, I walked back into the kitchen. Nora followed, breathless but unbroken. I pulled from my coat pocket the old family photo, the one of Katie, flower on her cheeks. I set it over a flame. The edges curled, blackened, turned to ash. The staff watched in silence. No one spoke. The meaning was clear. Blood had failed me. Loyalty had saved me. I turned to Nora, pressing the restaurant's master key into her hand. Family isn't who betrays you. It's who stand beside you when the knives are out. Her hand closed around the key. Her nod was steady, her eyes fierce. The last ember of the photo drifted upward, then vanished. My chest felt hollow, but also lighter. I looked around the kitchen. The steel counters, the simmering pans, the faces of people who had chosen me. My empire was smaller now, scarred but alive. And so was I. I whispered the final truth, not for cameras, not for applause, but for myself. Blood not always family. Loyalty always. And with that, the story of vengeance was complete. The city would never forget the night I turned poison into justice. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right. Derek's shoulders sagged. Papers slipped from his fingers, drifting to the floor like ash. He looked around once more, but the room had already condemned him. Then, for the first time in his life, he had no words. I turned to the guests. This island will not be his prison, nor his prize. It will belong to those who carry truth, not greed. My estate is rewritten. Jordan and the grandchildren after him will inherit, not to own but to guard. The gasps this time were of relief, of release. Wendy buried her face in her hands. Simon clutched her skirt, confused but safe. I walked past Derek, who stood frozen, broken. I paused only long enough to whisper, "The weight you wanted put on me is the one you'll carry now. Alone." Outside, the sun had climbed higher. I walked to the pier, Leroy at my side, Jordan trailing close behind. The ocean sparkled, free of storm. I sat at the edge, the dog tag warm in my hand. This little piece of metal had followed me through foxholes, through nights darker than this island ever knew. It was proof of who I was, proof of what I'd endured. And now, as gulls cried overhead, it was proof that truth, though bruised, though bloodied, had survived again. I let the tag dangle over the water, catching the light, then closed it back into my fist. Behind me, Derek's voice cracked once more, a sound more hollow than speech. But no one turned. No one listened. His reign of fear was finished. The lighthouse blinked against the brightening sky, steady, eternal. A signal not of warning now, but of promise. And as the waves lapped against the pier, I knew justice had been done. The island was no longer a cage. It was free again, and so was I. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.